If you want to find the vulnerabilities in Windows, there are various tools out there, and typically you want to run more than one tool. The first step should be Microsoft Baseline Security Analyzer because it's free, it comes from Microsoft, and this makes sure that you're at least doing what Microsoft recommends. And that should be your first step, of course. This makes sure that you have the latest version of everything, the latest patches, the configuration settings Microsoft recommends, and obviously that should be your first step. And in the old days, we would sneeringly say that that could not possibly be enough and you should do a lot more, but now Microsoft has greatly improved their security posture. So it's not as their recommendation should be given more weight than it used to be. But anyway, it looks like this, and there are different versions for different versions of Windows, and it can check your machine and give you a long report of all the things you should do, and it can even check all the machines on a network. If you have administrator credentials, log in over the network and check them all and give you one centralized report of all the problems it finds. And it checks not only problems with Windows, but problems with all the other Microsoft products, like IIS, SQL Server, Windows Media Player, and so on. And it will check more than just patches. It'll check to see if you have the wrong file system, too many administrator accounts with blank passwords, and things like that. Just a whole series of Microsoft best practices it'll tell you if you're not doing them. Here's IIS and SQL Server and the Microsoft desktop applications like Microsoft Office and Internet Explorer. It'll tell you about them. These days, I guess Edge. You get the latest version. So you install this thing, then you can scan your machine or all the machines on a network and find out if they meet the Microsoft recommendations, which is your first step, of course. Then you probably should go further in hardening your Windows system. And there's various ways to test it. Pen testers are people who break in and accomplish some goal, like become domain administrator typically, and then they tell you how they did it so you know you have a hole. One thing that is sort of nuts about pen testing is that you patch all your products and then you fix everything, and then next year you have another pen test and you always get in again. So you can never make something so secure that a pen tester can't get in if they're competent. You just hopefully learn something about how they got in. A security audit is a more formal thing, like a compliance audit, where you have this long checklist of, did you lock all the doors? Do the employees have to change their passwords? Are the passwords long enough? Do we make sure they're not writing it down? Do we make sure the server is in a locked room? Is there like a mag strike key? There's a whole list of things you should do. And they just see which one of these things you're doing, which ones you aren't, and then submit a report to management so they can fix it. And typically these days, this is in order to comply with regulations. Like you take credit cards, so you have to meet the PCI DSS standards, or you handle money, so you have to meet the government standards for financial institutions, Sarbox rules, and so on. Anyway, the most important security thing you can do is patch your stuff. If you're running old versions of things, you're just wide open. Yeah?
So is it pen testing, is it a huge company, or is it just like individual contractors?
Typically individual contractors. Really big companies actually have internal pen testing teams, but most people just hire contractors. Ernst & Young does it, for example. They have consultants. They'll send a consultant to your company, and they can do a pen test. They'll also send consultants that can fix security problems and such. That's typically what you do. It's typically not worth it to have an internal pen tester unless you're huge. You just hire an external consultant to do it. And if you take credit card numbers in sufficient quantities, I think more than 300,000 transactions a year, you are forced to have a pen test every year. And that has to be done by a special QSA, I think. The people that are qualified, there's a special type of security auditor just for this purpose, that you must hire from one of 10 companies, the official credit card inspector. Yeah?
So what type of companies would have internal pen testers?
Really huge companies like maybe Adobe and Microsoft and people that are so large they have many locations.
About banks, Chase?
I don't think so. Banks, I think, typically hire contractors, but I don't have a lot of experience to be sure. Anybody knows, feel free to speak up. Some of my other classes, I do have security officers from banks that can tell us things. I think they're in the forensics class. But it's a good point. I haven't worked inside big corporations, so I only have second and third hand information about them. Anyway, so if you want to keep your stuff patched, you can put on a patch by just going to some kind of update site, but then the question is, how do you know that all the machines at your whole company are patched? And if you're going to do that, Windows Update is not a good solution because individual people can choose to say yes or no, and some of them will say no. And also, it downloads a copy of the update from the Microsoft servers. There's two problems. The obvious problem is people might not follow the update. The worst problem, which is very real, is they might put on the update. A lot of Windows updates are broken, and they break important things. And even if it's not the kind of update that causes a worldwide scandal where it breaks thousands of machines, although that seems to happen 3 times out of 12 every year lately with Microsoft. Their products seem to have a 25% chance of causing a horrible scandal. it is very likely that it breaks the software your company's using because you have something you wrote yourself or something that Microsoft doesn't know about. So you can't just put on an update. You have to test it first and make sure it's okay, and then you have to push it out to make sure everybody gets it. So you need some kind of plan for that, and there's a system management server and WSUS or Microsoft products you can get that will just handle this update process, where it makes a local cache and it pushes out only the approved updates, and every time anybody logs into the domain, they can't, as part of the login process, they get their updates. So you know, if I say updates are going out today, by tomorrow, everybody has that update. And I also know that they only have the approved updates and not the ones that I decide I don't want to put on. Antivirus is still considered essential. It has been taking a beating in the last 3 or 4 years, largely due to Google's Vincent Taviso, who is a wizard at finding holes in antivirus and has utterly embarrassed many major providers by finding horrible security problems in their products. Just mind-boggling. Like you could put, I forget the brand, you could put one antivirus on your Mac and you could totally, it's not McAfee, he could totally, which one?
Norton.
No, not that either. I used it for a while. He had an antivirus product on your Mac, and he could totally take over your Mac remotely through the antivirus. It was awesome.
Wow.
I forgot the name. It may come back to me. They gave me a Sophos.
It wasn't a lot.
It was Sophos antivirus on the Mac, had that property, and it was really a scandal. He found like appalling mistakes they made. Anyway, so a lot of people have been talking about the flaws of antivirus products, but on Windows machines you have to have them, and on Android you have to have them. There are so many viruses that even with the flaws in the antivirus product, you really need it. Now, however, viruses are not the main threat. The main threat is pups. I haven't had a virus in years, but I've had pups on my machines, and my friends get pups all the time. These are programs, potentially unwanted programs, that do junk like pop-up ads and change your search engine and put toolbars in your browser. These things happen all the time because you go to download software and they poison it with this junk added to it. And it's really rude. And what happens to me is students try to download stuff in the lab and they can't tell the ads from the real download buttons because they carefully write the ads to be confusing, so they end up downloading some supposed download accelerator or something. And these are the pups. And they're very hard to remove, and one of the reasons why they're hard to remove is your antivirus software will not detect them for legal reasons. If you detect any of these things as a virus, they will sue your company because technically this stuff is legal. Technically, you agreed to it. There was some page that said agree to something. Nobody reads it. Somewhere in there says you agreed to have my search engine hijacked and my browser homepage changed and everything broken so I can't get anything done. Thanks, that's what I want. You technically agreed to that. So Malwarebytes is the only company that makes an anti-malware product that actually removes pups, and they have chosen to put up with the lawsuits and fight back. And apparently it's all right. And this is what you do. If you do get infected by these things, Malwarebytes is the best tool to remove them, in my experience, on both the PC and the Mac. And I had a friend of the Mac, and I said, oh, you won't have to worry about security. And he said, oh, yeah, within one day it was so ruined he couldn't do anything. And Malwarebytes was the cure. Yeah.
How far are they willing to go for fighting against it, per se? Like how much?
That's a good question. I haven't seen enough news stories to know how far it got. I know they did get sued by a few of them, and they fought back. And it didn't make them quit. So anyway, then you should have logs so you can see what's going on and review them. And this goes up to Security Information and Events Manager, which is very important. A real company have sensors all over the place and a central point with something like Splunk, so you can search through all the security events and all the logs and tell things like when you're being hacked, when your employees are running unauthorized programs, when your people are stealing data and it's leaving your company. You can spot that sort of thing if you have proper log monitoring. You should always disable things you're not using, like telnet and web servers on things that aren't the web server and so on. That's called reducing the attack surface. It would seem through simple logic that lowering the number of open ports and services would lower your chance of getting attacked. In practice, it's not so simple at all, but it does seem like a good matter of hygiene. To just have less open doors would make you safer. And most people believe this. As I mentioned occasionally, everything I'm teaching you is more of an art than a science. There are no security metrics, and when people do attempt to measure how many real attacks do you stop, they can't get a nice simple answer. It's not like you have 10 ports open, so you get 10 times as many attacks as if you had only one port open. It's not even close to that. But it does seem logical that turning off things you're not using would help. You have sample applications that came with products. You want to get rid of those. This is a very common attack point. When people put out like a new version of something like IIS or SQL Server, they will then have little programs that come with it to show off the new features, and those are typically sloppily written and have vulnerabilities. And people know to look for them. This is what Scanner Nicto will find. It'll find these sample programs that are on a lot of machines. And it's hardened machines, you do things like disable the guest account and change names. You should have a different scheme for your names on public servers than on private servers, so people can't easily guess the names of accounts and servers inside. Microsoft has always recommended disabling the administrator account. Now all of their operating systems, desktop operating systems, start out that way. And this is the game. So one thing I thought I'd put in is the latest Microsoft Security Intelligence Report. Microsoft has, for the last 10 years, had these boxes that pop up saying, please tell Microsoft about this problem when something crashes. And they also have the malicious software removal tool, which comes in with your updates, which removes certain malware from your machine. It's not as comprehensive as antivirus, but they do take certain families of malware that many people are getting infected with, and they automatically push down a product that removes that malware, and they keep track of how many times they find it, and they publish the results every 6 months. So here's what they showed, the malware families. Mostly what you have now is exploit kits. Axe-Purgle seems to be the latest one now. Most of the 3 out of the top 4 threats are exploit kits. And the threat is not that bad. Less than 1% of machines get infected by these things these days. But here's how many of them have encounters and infection rates. And you see it is 20% of all the machines in this quarter have encountered malware, but only 16 out of 1,000 got infected, and Microsoft then cleaned it. So that's one clue. Here's another one. This is the software that was blocked by the Microsoft product that blocks the most common threats, and you see something like 60% of machines had a PUP block, potentially unwanted application. It's the #1 threat, just like in my experience. Those things that are not exactly viruses, they're technically legal, but they do junk to mess up your machine. A lot of machines have those. Down here is normal malware, and here's other kinds of unwanted software. Here's one that I didn't realize. Previously, the amazing thing was you didn't see a difference here. You would think that machines and companies would be a lot less safer, because at the company, you have a company firewall, you have a security team, and that now seems to be true. Machines in their domain only have a 10% chance of encountering malware. Machines at home have like a 25% chance of encountering malware. That would make sense, because hopefully your company has some kind of filtering on the network, and apparently that's now having some effect. And here's how many people have antivirus. It has greatly changed. It used to be like 20 or 30% of Microsoft machines had no antivirus at all. Now it's slowly falling down, below 20%, but almost 80% of them have always got antivirus on every time the Windows update process checks. Yeah.
What does intermittent?
That means, because they check like frequently, like every time you put on your monthly update, that means sometimes they had AV and sometimes they didn't. Yeah.
Doesn't it ship with antivirus now? Security?
It does, but see, Microsoft admitted that their product shouldn't even count as antivirus. They were so embarrassed. Independent tests, it was so terrible that it wouldn't even be tested with the others. It is, and they, what they did was they bought a product called Giant Anti-Spyware and rebranded it, and apparently it was no good. So
enterprise class stuff was winning awards for a couple of years at least. I don't know if they're...
yeah, I wonder. Maybe they just bribed the award sellers. Anyway, I'm not sure. But it is the same definitions as their enterprise forefront gateway that is on the home product, which they've admitted is useless, and you actually have to buy antivirus in addition to it, that's got to be hard to distribute a product and then admit this is crap, you need to buy something else. But one of the funny ones was the Windows XP defragger. It takes like hours and does absolutely nothing. It's still just as fragmented afterwards. You have to download the third-party defragger that goes in like 5 minutes and actually does a disk. They bought that from a third party and apparently crippled it when they sold it to them. Anyway, like from Windows Remote Desktop, they used to control a server, that is Citrix. They sold them a very limited brand of product of Citrix. And when it first came out in 2000 server, you could see the panel, and like there's 5 good options that are permanently grayed out, because those were the Citrix options, and all you get is the one lame option, which is the one that Microsoft bought. But they left the other options in the panel to remind you that you should go buy Citrix. Anyway, so here's another thing that would make sense, of course. The machines that do not actually have antivirus get infected more. Well, you would hope so, right? You would like to believe that antivirus is doing something, and apparently it is doing something. It's lowering you from 30% down to 12% chance of getting infected. That's what you would hope. You'd like it to take you down to 0, and it doesn't do that, but at least it does make some difference. All right, and then there's Linux. Linux and Windows can both be secure if you set them up correctly, but if you're sloppy, they both have problems. So Linux has got a different directory structure and a different file system. It uses ext3 or ext4, which is different than NTFS, although it has approximately the same features. And it has a package management system. That's one thing great about the Debian branch of Linux, and other ones do too, like Red Hat, where they have an online server that has all the software you could want. You can just do apt-get and pull it down. So installing an application is like putting on something from Windows features, which is nice. But you're trusting all those repositories, all these random people are writing that stuff, and you're often getting really old versions because the volunteers don't bother to put the new versions in the libraries, the repositories. So, it's got its weaknesses. If you want Windows and Linux to play together on the same network, which most companies have, then you have to give Linux some software to imitate Windows, and Samba is one of the big ones. This will speak SMB, so your Linux servers can share files with Windows machines. And therefore you get some vulnerabilities, but it does make it possible to more easily integrate them. One thing I found when I did this maybe 5 or 6 years ago with Ubuntu is it was almost impossible to make a password protected file share that would work. The only thing that would work was to let everybody have full control. Because the way it passes the password hashes was not the right format or something. This is very painful. Hopefully it's gotten better since then. I'm not sure. If you want to find the vulnerabilities in your Linux machine, the CVE website, of course, is there. It's listing all Linux vulnerabilities, just like the Windows vulnerabilities. And get tools to scan it. You do not have something like the Microsoft Baseline Security Analyzer. You just have to get a vulnerability scanning product like Nessus or the open source version, OpenVAS. Any commercial product will scan Linux machines as well as Windows machines and just take hours and send thousands of packets at it and just test a whole bunch of CVE numbers one after the other to see if it's got this vulnerability or that vulnerability. And so you'll get reports here, this thing showing NetBIOS names have been found. This one found that this thing has Mozilla Firefox software, and that version of Firefox has a buffer overflow. This is the sort of thing it does. It just has a long, long list of vulns, and it checks one by one to see which vulnerabilities you have. Here's a DHCP client buffer overflow vulnerability. There's just an endless chain of these things. And the vulnerability scanner will then have links to research. So every one of these vulns could be hours of research, of you deciding what it means and what you want to do about it. All right, and then you can have Trojans on Linux just like Windows. In fact, almost all forms of Windows malware first were developed on Linux and then ported over to Windows in general terms, although the specific ones use specific Windows products. Yeah?
The people who actually do research, who pays for that?
Well, actually, I've heard some discussion from people who do threat research, and what they tell me, in general terms, is vulnerabilities are discovered in America and turned into exploits. They then travel to Russia, where they are monetized for money, and then they move to Asia, where they're used by the government military. They say that's the general progression. It's us. We're the people with Black Hat and DEF CON and all these classes and people discovering vulnerabilities and publishing them, which is then used by people to commit crime. That's what people say in general. Although I must say there are exceptions like Kaspersky. Kaspersky in Russia is really right at the forefront of analyzing malware and finding, but I don't care about them finding new vulnerabilities. They just analyze malware as their focus. They're much better at it than that, and they proved a few years ago that every other antivirus company in the world just steals their definitions, rather than because they're so much ahead. Yeah.
Because other than Google's Project Zero,
Yeah.
Is there a corporate sponsorship for somebody to make this as a profession, or is it?
Now there's a little bit in the world of bug bounties. That's where it's coming. And there's two ways to make money from finding vulnerability. Well, there's two legal ways to make money from finding vulnerabilities. One is to sell the vulnerabilities with brokers as 0 days to the highest bidder. And there are 4, VUPEN does this in France all the time, and there are several other brokers, like Kevin Mitnick does, a broker too. He'll sell 0 days for you. And you sell them to people, and you can have your own rules, like I'll sell to anybody, or I'll only sell to the US government, or I'll only sell to members of NATO. VUPEN is highly considered controversial in Paris, but they claim that they're moral because they only sell to NATO members. But anyway, you have to have your rules. There are no actual laws about this that anybody can tell. But that's one way. The other way is to try to collect bug bounties by doing research for products that are advertising reward, like Google will reward you, and Microsoft will reward you if you find things.
But you have to do research on your spare time.
There are people who quit their job and do it full time, but you have to really be good. To make a living at it, you have to be very good at it. And it's not a skill you can learn in school anywhere, really. You get a little bit of it here in like the exploit development class, but that's only the first step, and you have to go many steps beyond that before you're making money. All I ever won was a t-shirt. I've never got a bug bounty higher than that yet. Yeah?
I just want to say that some companies, even if you're working for them, will allow you to participate in bug bounties with other companies, and then you would still be able to get the money. So
Yeah.
basically, they would look at it as your own job training.
Yeah.
You know, as long as you do it in your free time from home on a weekend, they probably wouldn't care if you submit a bug bounty to Google
Yeah.
to get 30K. They'd probably be okay with that.
Yeah,
So you
but
don't necessarily have to put
but
your
it's a
job.
long road from like a normal security practitioner up to the skill level to do that. Anyway, these are good. Anyway, so as you know, malware can do all these things. Yeah.
I also want to add that in CTS, there's a lot of teams from other countries.
Yeah.
All over the world. So I'm not sure that I would buy this US-centric view that vulnerabilities are found here. Because it seems like there's people who can do this all over the world.
It does. It does. That's why I don't know if it's true. It's just something I heard from one of these people that do global threat analysis. But it's a very flaky business. You never really know where anybody is. Yeah. Anyway, so as you know, malware can do any of these things: log keystrokes, steal passwords from your system, and it works on Linux too. There are Linux Trojans out there. There are Linux rootkits that infect your machine and make it permanently owned by another person until you find it and remove it. There is RK Hunter is one of the programs to try to find rootkits on Linux, but in principle, finding rootkits on an infected system should be impossible. A proper rootkit is below this, like the ultimate one is Joanna Ritzkaus's blue pill that turns your machine into a virtual machine and now runs malware elsewhere. And nothing you run in that will ever tell that it's in there unless a mistake is made. That should be perfect. And she made the defense against it too, which is cubes, where you have multiple virtual machines and you run a different browser in each virtual machine. So even if you get a rootkit, it will only get the contents of this virtual machine, and you have like a blue one for social networking and a red one for banking. And so if your social networking gets a virus, it can only steal your social networking data. That's her idea of a proper defense. Anyway, so if you want to protect yourself, user awareness is good so your employees know not to click on things, and updates are still your number one defense. User awareness training is somewhat controversial because no matter how much you train them, somebody will still make a mistake. But it seems like a good idea to try to train them about the current threats and your company policies, especially, so that they know what offenses they'll get fired for. That would seem, you can't really fire people for things unless you make sure they know what the rules are. Yeah?
What about the ad blocks and all this?
Ad blockers are increasingly common, and certainly they make you a lot safer. The ads often have malware in them, so it's a good thing to run ad blockers. Probably you'll get harassed more and more by companies that don't like it, but it's a good security measure. It's not as powerful as antivirus, but it's like there, something between antivirus. Like antivirus is more powerful, firewall is more powerful, but an ad blocker does add security. It also makes things load faster, and it also means you don't have to look at the stupid ads. So, anyway, patching things is your main defense, and most Linux versions will now bug you the way OS 10 and Windows does by popping up all the time saying you better put on your updates. Although it's much less important to put on Linux updates, it still makes you more secure. And there are tools that will give you a security analysis of your machine and a benchmark. So I got the last batch of iClickers here. And then I'll go to the lab, help anybody who wants help on projects. So, which attack would you prevent if you moved from Telnet to SSH? I guess I'll quit at 30. I think there might be more than 11 of you surviving. Let's see. The others may have fallen asleep. All right, so you stop sniffing, right? This is what we do at the Wall of Sheep. People can sniff packets, but they can't read the data out of them because it's encrypted. That's the point of it. All right. All right, which one hides something on a target so the attacker can come back later and have a permanent presence on that box? Quit at 25. All right, that's the point of a rootkit. even when you restart the machine, even when you try to find it, you can't find it easily, and so they can own that machine for a long period of time. And I'm trying to create it. There we are. All right, good. All right. What's the most difficult to prevent? I'll quit at 25. All right, and that's social engineering. The people are the weakest spots and they're the hardest to patch, and this is why this has moved. I remember years, even 4 years ago, in days of LulzSec, I did things involving social engineering, and they said, that's not hacking. You're not really hacking. I said, why isn't that hacking? And now this is over. Now every pen test includes social engineering. It is now accepted. And one thing, I was at a security conference, the High Tech Crime Investigators Association earlier, a couple days ago, and they said that at a major corporation around here, they phished their own employees. And they're a security company, and he said 80% of the employees clicked on the link. So it's a problem. And that's social engineering. You know, just getting people to do something stupid is more powerful. And another thing they said, I think 80% of major intrusions that stole data did not use any malware at all. They just found like a default password somewhere, and when they got in, they just used Windows command line utilities and tools that existed. They didn't have to put any malware on it at all, so all your antivirus never had a chance. And there was a company there that was talking about how to defend your network, and someone said, shall we put up honeypots? Oh, it's in the intrusion detection book. And he said, incident response book. He said, I don't want to hear it. You're wasting your time on a honeypot. Tell me that you've actually changed all the default passwords, closed the unused ports, and updated all the software, and made sure that has happened before you start talking to me about honeypots. Just do the basics. You will find that there are wide open doors just hanging open, and that's where you should focus your energies, not with exotic things.
Yeah, wireless printers, sure.
Yep, that's another one. Wireless printer, people can get in your network. Yeah, there's actually auditing to make sure that like the top 10 stupid things aren't happening would greatly improve your safety more than any exotic feature you can do. Anyway, all right. So which one exploits a poorly written C program? All right, guess I can quit at 30. Maybe 25 would have done. All right, and that's the buffer overflow, particular problem caused by C. Someone told me there's another language, perhaps Java, where you can do it. I'm not sure, but I've never seen it happen anywhere but C. All right, what's the security scanner that finds Windows security problems? I'll quit at 25. All right, that's the Microsoft Baseline Security Analyzer. I used to have a project using it when I taught Windows desktop support. It's pretty dull. You run this thing, it has a long list of stuff, but anyway, it does fine if you're not doing Microsoft's recommendation, and you should certainly at least be doing that. All right, which one lets Linux machines access Windows file shares? I'll quit at 25. All right, and that is Samba. Okay. All right, good. So, that's it. All right, let me stop the recording and I'll see who got the most right. And then I'll go to the lab, 123, Chapter 8, B.